How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Set 6, and today we've got what I believe is the final set of interviews from hobby consolers. So we've got two questions here. One of them discusses Sephiroth, and another one discusses new content that's been added in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I also finally got Chapter 4 of the First Soldier broke down and reviewed and covered on the channel, so you can go and check the playlist out. I'm going to be breaking down every single chapter in there, and it's going to be in like a quick format. It's not going to be like sitting there and watching through a playthrough for 30 minutes. It's much faster than that. So check them out. But yeah, let's dive into these interviews, well, these questions. It's all one interview. We've already covered the bulk of it. And there is a link that's got each part of it that they've released so far. I'll make sure that that goes into the description so that if you want to go and look over any of the parts of this interview that they posted, you can do. Please do consider dropping a like on the video and subscribing for future content. We're creeping closer to that 2,000. I think we're about 35 away now from 2,000 subs, so creeping up on it, but let's crack on. So like I say, we've got two questions here, one of them discussing Sephiroth and one of them discussing new content. I think we'll look at the new content one first and save Sephiroth till last. You know, save the best till last. But the question that they were asked were, is there anything that you couldn't include in the original Final Fantasy VII that was possible in Rebirth? And this is something that I want to address real quick as well, because I'm seeing a lot of people saying that the reasons that a lot of these things are being added to Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth is because they're things that they couldn't do back in the day. They were incapable of adding these things into the game back in the day. And it's always stank of bullshit to me. That's not true. There were loads of games back then that did a lot of the narrative changes that have been done in Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I assume. So, like, adding characters, changing characters, doing things like that, none of that is things that they could not add back in the 90s. They could have done all of that. So all of the story changes that we're seeing are nothing to do with the technology only just being available, because they could have done it. The only things that they were restricted by the technology on were things like facial expressions and model expressions and things like that, because, you know, the models, they weren't very big. Graphical fidelity back in the day on the PS1 wasn't the best. So you couldn't really see the minute details of characters' reactions and facial expressions and stuff like that. And in the same way, you couldn't really do voice acting. I mean, there were some voice-acted games on the PS1, so that's less of a limitation. But at the same time, the amount of information that they crammed into each disc of Final Fantasy VII, there wouldn't have been room for voice-acted lines. The game would have ended up like 6 discs long, if that was the case. So, again, I understand that limitation. But they're the only two, really. So yeah, all this talk about story being different because now they can do things they couldn't do. If anyone says that to you, tell them no. And Katase himself literally tells them no right now. He says, as far as specific scenes, characters, or objects that I wanted to include in the original game but couldn't, I don't remember there being anything. But in terms of the presentation of the game, there are many things that we couldn't do before that we can do now that would have been very useful. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's actually things like your graphics and your audio. And Katase continues, in particular the voices. In the original Final Fantasy VII, we were not able to give voices to the characters. And the facial animations, for example, their gestures, the acting and the drama of the presentation. Everything had to be simplified because of the scale of the characters. I think each character was only 400 polygons. So obviously we were very limited, hence everything was less refined and the performances were stylized. But nowadays, thanks to performances, facial animations, etc., we can show much more subtlety, much more detail. There are certain scenes from the original FF7 that I remember very well, they mean a lot to me, and others that perhaps didn't mark me as much. I don't remember them as well. But when you look at everything through the remake, now those that I wasn't so fond of have great quality, the presentation, the amazing performances. Now they are very exciting scenes. So what Katase is essentially saying there is like, no, there was nothing narrative-wise that we couldn't do back in the day. It was all visual stuff and audio stuff, and the fact that we can do it now, it's elevated scenes that he didn't feel were as impactful in the original game. So there were scenes maybe that he didn't resonate with as much because it didn't feel like there was enough emotion being conveyed from the game with just the words and the basic models that were on the screen. But now that he's got voice acting, he's got facial animations, he's got detailed models that they can work with and show expression, now those scenes are elevated. And that makes complete sense. That's a brilliant answer. And I'm very glad that they've come out and said that as far as scenes, characters or objects that they wanted to include in the original but couldn't, there weren't any. And I'm sure it may be different for one or two of the other developers, maybe there were things that some of them wanted to add in, but none of those things will be characters, locations, or anything like that, unless it was a case of they ran out of space, in which case, just add another disc, bro, God. Just give us 4 discs, you did it with 8, do it with 7. No. But you get what I'm saying? When they talk about things that they weren't able to do back in the day, that's mostly what they're talking about. Audio stuff, visual stuff, not narrative stuff, not characters, none of that business. It was all about how they could convey the emotion of the scene to you as the gamer. And they did have less tools to do it with, but they found other ways to do it, and I think that was what made the game special back then. But anyway, I'm going off on a fucking tangent here, so we'll rein it back in. But it's very interesting to see that none of these things that they're adding now, character-wise, story-wise, according to Katase at the very least, were things that they wanted to add back then. So yeah, let me know what you're thinking about that bit in the comments below. But we'll move on to the Sephiroth interview. Now, we did a big chat recently about Sephiroth and could he be redeemed and things like that. And we kind of got soft confirmation that we won't see him being redeemed from one of the other interviews that we did. But we've also kind of got that again, as well as a little bit more. So let's jump into this one. So the question posed to Katase and Hamaguchi again is, Sephiroth is considered to be one of the most iconic characters in the Final Fantasy saga, and more specifically, he is one of the most remembered villains. What do you think makes him so special? And Katase responds, referencing a conversation that he had with Nomura back in the day when the two of them designed Sephiroth, essentially. And he says that, we had a conversation and decided something very early in development that has held true ever since. All these years, within the Final Fantasy VII universe, there is no one better than Sephiroth. He will always be the strongest, the most powerful, and the most evil there is. This is music to my ears, keep talking. In many RPGs, there is what we call boss inflation. Yes. You meet a very powerful boss who is the ultimate warrior, but oh boy, behind that character is another who turns out to be even more powerful. And you defeat him and, surprise, there was another even more powerful one behind him. And that leaves those who arrived first in a bad place. We decided we weren't going to do that in Final Fantasy VII, that there was going to be no one above Sephiroth. He's always going to be the big bad and the most powerful villain. I think that may have had something to do with it remaining so memorable, because within Final Fantasy VII, no one is better than Sephiroth. Oh, that is music to my ears. All of this talk of, oh, it's going to be Jenova, Jenova's the big bad, really, Jenova, oh, we're going to fight Jenova. No. Sephiroth. Hamaguchi picks it up and runs with it and says that Sephiroth is already a very popular and beloved character, but let me tell you, I think people are going to love him and have an even stronger connection with him after playing Rebirth. We had a lot of reactions from the press after playing the flashback with Sephiroth and Cloud as young people. He's slightly different from the Cloud that most people know. He's rougher and more noober. He's a well less versed character, and it's very interesting to see that, but we also see Sephiroth from a different angle, when he wasn't the villain that he would later become. The demo ends at a certain point, just before you get to the Nebo reactor, and after that comes something that hasn't been seen yet. Although it's something that was in the original, so people already know, we see what made Sephiroth stop being that heroic, more human character and become the villain who disappears into the flames, becoming the true Sephiroth. Even knowing what happens, when I was working on that part, it really impacted me. I wouldn't go so far as to say that I sided with Sephiroth, but I empathised with him. You understand much better why he made that decision, and I think that when people see it, they will love Sephiroth even more. And yeah, it's definitely the case that, you know, Sephiroth is... I was talking about this in chat on stream last night with Mephisto. Shout out Mephisto. But I've recently watched The Boys, so I've been a little bit behind the curve. I kind of wanted to stack up a little bit and then just binge it, and that's what I've done this week. So I've binged all 3 seasons of The Boys, and oh my god, Homelander, wow. But I kind of view Homelander in a similar way to Sephiroth. Like, it's not his fault that he is what he is. I mean, he is what he is, and we need to deal with him. But it's not his fault that he is what he is. In The Boys, it's Vought and everything that they do to Homelander and, you know, the shit that they put him through. And in Final Fantasy VII, it's Shinra and what they do to Sephiroth and other soldiers, of course, and all of the shit that they put them through. And there is a little bit of crossover there between the two characters. Do you know what I mean? They've both got a tragic story. You can understand why both of them have gone the way that they've gone. But at the same time, you gotta stop them. So, yeah, they're both kind of empathetic. I hate the fact that I empathise with Homelander a little bit because he is an absolute dick, but moving on. One of the things that I enjoy the most out of this interview is the confirmation, like I say, that Sephiroth is going to remain the big bad, the top of the tree. That's where Sephiroth is, and that's where he remains. And I'm very happy that that's been confirmed, because there's been a lot of talk about, like, Sephiroth being puppeted by Jenova, essentially, and Jenova's really the big bad, and we'll end up fighting Jenova and freeing Sephiroth. I've seen it all. But I'm glad that that's kind of been shot in the foot a little bit with this. Again, take everything that they say in interviews with a pinch of salt. But it seems like they're only really super sus when they're talking about the story and the changes that are coming. That's when they're super sus. I don't really trust them then. Right now, just talking about Sephiroth, I can believe this because in every single piece of Final Fantasy VII media, no one has been put above Sephiroth. So, I can't see that changing in the remake or Rebirth project. That's my take at least. Sephiroth is the big bad. Yes, we empathise with him. Yes, we get that he had a real shit life. And plug in, again, the First Soldier series that I'm doing. Going through that, we have just met young Sephiroth in Chapter 4. And I think we're going to see, and we have already seen a little bit, a more robotic, destructive side of Sephiroth. Potentially slightly more in line with the Sephiroth that we see after the Shinra Manor and everything that goes on in Nibelheim. This Sephiroth just kind of turns up and decimates a few hundred people or something like that and just doesn't really care. He's like, yeah, cool, I'm taking over, we're going to go do some shit. We're going to kill everybody on this island, you guys can just watch my back. As I said in the video, make me some coffee. And Sephiroth will just deal with it. So it's quite obvious that even in his youth, Sephiroth is, while he's incredibly powerful, he's going through and doing a lot of things that will inevitably add up to a broken Sephiroth. And we all know what happens when you get a broken Sephiroth. But anyway, that's going to be the end of this video. So main talking points are, first and foremost, there's not really anything new that they couldn't add in the original. So none of this stuff that they're adding is stuff that they could not add in the original, according to Katase at least. Take it with a pinch of salt. And Sephiroth will always be at the top of the tree, which makes complete sense. And the last couple of interviews have really doubled down on this. We are not getting a redemption arc for Sephiroth. It's just not happening. Which makes me quite happy, because I like Sephiroth being a bad guy. He's good at it. Let him do it. So yeah, don't forget, drop a like on the video, subscribe for future content, leave your thoughts in the comments below about, you know, any of these interviews. Just talk to me about Final Fantasy VII. But, more importantly than anything, have a great day.